Greetings, Grid Connections listeners. Today, I'm excited to share with you this episode with Tom Moloughney of the State of Charge podcast, the co-host of Batteries Included podcast, and now the founder of evchargingstations.com. Tom and I had a great conversation about what got him into EVs, along with some of the different experiences that he's had and he wants to share with soon-to-be EV owners as well.
Hey, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Tom, I have a really good feeling that the likelihood that people who watch and listen to our podcast have probably already come across your channel and know what you do. But real quickly, can you just give an overview about how you got into EVs and then how that led to the formation of State of Charge?
Sure. So, my entry into this EV space is an interesting one. I owned a restaurant in Montclair, New Jersey for almost 30 years. And I was always interested in alternative fuel vehicles. I always figured at some point we're going to be transitioning off gas. What would we be using? For a while, I thought it would be hydrogen. But I was always interested in electric vehicles because I know people that had made home built cars, and I know they worked. It was just a matter of, well, how far would they go and how quick can you recharge them? So back in 2008, I found this online application. It said, do you want to drive an electric car? And I said, that sounds interesting. So I filled it out. It was BMW had this pilot program where they were going to be making about 500 electric cars. They used a Mini Cooper as the base. They called it the Mini E. And they were looking for people to lease these for a year and drive it and kind of report back to them on what they liked, what they didn't like. It was a pilot. It was a learning experience for BMW. So I thought it'd be a cool idea. And I lived in one of the few areas that they offered this in the country. It was only available in a small New York, New Jersey region, and also in a certain area of California. And I live in New Jersey, so I was in that area, filled it out, and I forgot about it. And then about a year later, I got an email from BMW saying, hey, you've been accepted. Do you want to be in this program? Then I had to think about it and say, oh, wow, do I really want to do this? Because, I didn't know was the EV even good? Was it even going to be able to go up a hill? Was it going to be this weak thing with like 50 horsepower that puttered when you stepped on the accelerator? But I said, yeah, I think I like to do this. This should be fun. So I entered the program, and immediately when I got it, I was like, this is freaking amazing. Like, this thing is so much fun to drive. It's deadly silent. It's got instant torque. It's unlike anything I've driven before. It's a Mini Cooper, so it handles really well. It's like this little rocket, on wheels. And I was just kind of blown away. And I'm like, holy crap, like, this is what I want to drive. Like, I want to drive electric vehicles. And at the time, I wasn't doing anything in the space as far as like reporting or writing or blogging, nothing like that. So then about 4 months after I got the car, I was like, okay, I'm going to drive electric cars, whether I have to make my own, but this is so cool, never going to gas stations. So I put a solar array on my roof and a 9-kilowatt solar array. So I said, I'm going to make my own fuel. This is what I'm going to do. So then a month or two after, I found a Facebook group that was only for the people in this Mini E group. So I joined the Facebook group, and it was a great resource to share information, like some of the online forums still are for electric vehicle owners. It's a learning experience. Most people, it's their first EV. So
sure.
These groups are very helpful. I'm sure you've learned stuff online and groups and so forth. So I learned that some of the people in this Mini E group started blogs, and they're like, I'm blogging about life with an electric car. And I said, that's kind of a cool idea. Like, maybe people are interested in this. So I started a blog, and I started writing about my experience living with an electric car. Now, don't forget, this is 2009, early 2009. There were no electric cars out there yet. The Leaf hadn't come yet. The Volt hadn't come yet. The Tesla Roadster was just starting to be delivered, but it was $110,000.
It was a unicorn at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So, and at the time, nobody even gave Tesla, a chance in hell of ever making it, but right. Anyway, even Elon didn't think at that time it was going to make it, which he's said in many interviews, like, yeah, I thought for sure in 2009, like we were going belly up. So any event, I started blogging. My blogs got really popular. A lot of people started reading them from around the world. I started getting noticed by some of the news media. They started asking me to do interviews. I was in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, a whole bunch of national magazines and articles. So then I started getting asked to write for like some websites. Hey, would you like to write a guest article about what it's like to live with an electric car? Because we don't know anybody that has an electric car. So I started writing, and my articles seemed to do well, and I started getting more and more invitations. So I started writing regularly for a few sites, and all the while I was still in my restaurant. But then I started getting asked by automakers if I would do consulting on electric vehicles. So because they were just looking for people that had experience with them. So started doing, I did a few consulting gigs for some of the major automakers. And I was like, hey, I might be able to make some money doing this. And things progressed, and I got more and more interested in electric vehicles. And I said, I want to figure out how to make a career out of this. So I started writing regularly. And then I got to the point where I said, this is what I want to do. So I sold my restaurant after 29 years owner, and I went full time into EVs. And I was like, I still don't even know what I'm going to do yet. Am I going to be a writer? Am I going to do consulting? At the time, I had some infrastructure companies that I did some consulting for, and I started doing chargers reviews. I had chargers that I was like, let me, and I know they're EVSE. We can get into why I call them chargers, even though they're not technically chargers. But I started doing some reviews, and they seemed to be really popular. People were like, that's great. Like, nobody out there is telling us which ones are good and bad. So I started doing that regularly, and that kind of developed into my niche where I report on all things EV, but the thing that I really is close to my heart is explaining charging equipment and how to charge your EV to people. So there's a million people out there doing reviews on EVs, and I still do reviews on electric vehicles and so forth. But what I really focused in on was reviewing charging equipment. So I started this YouTube channel called State of Charge. And that's primarily what I do. Now I do range tests, and I do a DC fast charging analysis and all that. That all works well. But what I really do is charging equipment reviews. And I think it's been very helpful to people new to the business, new to EVs, where they're like, okay, I got this great EV now. What charger do I get? I don't know what's a good charger versus a bad charger. And hopefully I'm helping them figure that out.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent summary. And it's funny you mentioned the Mini Cooper, or the electric Mini Cooper, because I believe it was around that time. And I don't know if this was offered on the East Coast as well, but BMW also played around with a electric BMW 1 Series. And that, I know they were doing kind of test drives, and I think very limited leases in the Bay Area. I happened to be down visiting when they were doing just randomly like a test drive event of them right off one of the piers. And I drove that thing. It looked cooler than the base 1 Series because it had this bulge in the front, because it looked like what would normally be like a turbocharger or something was there because of the batteries. And I drove it and I was like, oh my God. Yeah, I know of Tesla, but these OEMs got it figured out. They're just gonna build these. I'm gonna buy one of these because this thing is so much fun to drive, great power. And maybe a few months after that, it was just like, it never happened. And I have yet to ever see a electric 1 Series again. And it was phenomenal. It was such a fun car. I think the range may have only been like 150 miles or something, but at the time I thought it was the greatest thing. And shortly after that, never saw it again. I know the electric Mini program continued a little bit after that, but I don't know if you ever got a chance to drive one of those or see those.
So, yeah, long story now. It actually did materialize. It was called the BMW Active E, and it was a retrofitted 1 Series. And the bulge on the hood was exactly what you said, because the battery block, they had to put batteries all over. It wasn't just one battery pack, because they were retrofitting a car. There were batteries in the transmission tunnel, and there was a big battery block under the front hood. So it's called the BMW Active E, and it was offered in a certain number of areas, Northern California and Southern California, and then in the same area that the Mini E was available here on the East Coast. So that was BMW's second generation of prototype electric vehicle. It was never designed to be bought. So what happened was everyone that was in the Mini E program got first dibs on an Active E if they wanted to lease one.
Interesting.
And then they made more Active E's. They made 1,100 of them. So they had extra. So they did offer it as a lease. You could have leased one if you would have followed up with your dealership and asked them questions about it. So they put 1,100 of them out there. I had one. I drove it for 2.5 years. I drove mine about 75,000 miles.
Wow.
And I was the first person to get it. Now, BMW, because at that time, I'd become very well known with the Mini E for doing all these news articles and everything. Other people in the Mini E program, I was probably the highest profile person because I had done a lot of news reporting, and BMW used to take me around to these events so I could talk about electric mobility as a customer, not as a BMW representative. So they asked me, they said, we want you to be the very first handover of the Active E. And the CEO of BMW is going to hand you the keys. We're going to do a big handover ceremony at BMW headquarters. News is going to be there and all this stuff. So I said, sure, you'll drive your Mini E in, you'll park it, you'll give us the keys, then we'll give you the keys to the Active E, you'll make a speech and you'll drive away, which is what we did. So the interesting thing about that is, so I leased the BMW Active E. That was in January of 2012, January 2012.
Gotcha.
So that was the first electric BMW offered to the public ever. You know, they had made experimental BMWs before. Now, the Mini Cooper was a Mini. It's not a BMW. So
Right.
Tom Moloughney is the very first person in BMW history to lease or purchase an all-electric BMW, and that'll never change. And they actually had a little section in the BMW museum over in Munich on this, with pictures of me getting the keys of it and everything. So it's interesting that you brought up that car, because there's a piece of history that I'm involved with that car, and I'm the first customer to ever get an all-electric BMW.
So between the two, I mean, technically at that time, Mini was owned by BMW already, right?
Still are.
Yeah. Now between the two, which one did you like more?
It's hard to say because they both had different characters. The Mini E was a very rudimentary. It was like a home-built car. You know, BMW put it together really quickly with all third-party components. It wasn't BMW's tech. You know, they had basically AC Propulsion, which was a company out in California. They had the powertrain and all this stuff. So it was a Frankenstein car, we used to call it, because it was cobbled together with all these parts. But it was just a blast to drive, and it was my first EV. So it'll always hold a place in my heart. Now, the Active E was much more polished. It had a thermal management system. That Mini E had no thermal management. So in summer, the batteries would get really hot. In the winter, they'd get really cold. The Active E had a liquid thermal management system. It had, much nicer, more plush interior, softer ride, a quieter cabin. It kind of looked really cool, as you mentioned, a 1 Series, So I'm not going to pit one against the other. They're both I hold them both close to my heart because they're my first two electric vehicles that were never available for sale. They were designed only to be prototypes. But I love them both in their own unique way. If you put a gun to my head, I'd probably take the Mini over it because it was my first electric car. Gotcha. And it was just such a blast to drive. The Mini E was faster than the Active E.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I think that is probably where I originally came across some of your writings and stuff, was some of the reporting you did on the Mini E. But I guess I either didn't realize or had forgotten that you also had an Active E.
Yeah, and I had a blog about that too, the Active E blogspot. I think it was Active E, I forget the name, but Active E Mobility.blogspot was my blog on that. Yeah.
Well, I guess segueing a little bit to what you're covering now more, I think let's talk about State of Charge. And you've actually had some really interesting products to kind of review and cover the past few months, ranging from the new Tesla charger that you seem to be pretty impressed with, or at least last I'd heard, to even, I think it's also been really interesting to see some of the charging discrepancies you've had with cars. And the one that kind of comes to mind was like the Lyric, between what Kyle experienced, what you experienced, and kind of figuring out some of the issues with that. But let's kind of kick it off with just the state of level 2 charging in general. What you've been seeing, and maybe some of, for anyone listening, any tips and kind of recommendations for anyone out in the market right now.
Yeah. So, the one thing is that all level 2 charging equipment isn't created equal. And very high level advice would be, please don't go to Amazon and just search EV charger and then click lowest to highest price, because you will get garbage. And a lot of people do that for Amazon. And I know why they do that, because we're so conditioned. Let's say you're going to buy, a tape measure,
Yeah.
like you might search lowest to highest because you're like, look, I'm going to anyway in a year. So why should I buy the $40 tape measure when there's one for $9.99? And that's not a bad idea. But when you're buying charging equipment, it's a different animal here. And there's a lot of very low quality, cheap equipment, mostly getting dumped in from Asia, that just, it's garbage and it's not going to last. And if you're lucky, it'll just break. It won't cause a problem where melting the pins on your car and you need a new charge inlet installed for $1,500, or fire in your house. So,
which I think those two reasons alone are enough. But I mean,
but people don't
totally
realize
get it when
that,
they're
Chase,
new.
that's
They
the
don't
problem.
realize it, especially
They don't realize it.
Yeah.
Sorry to talk over you. That's the biggest issue. People, they just don't, they don't realize that there's serious safety issues with charging. It's perfectly safe if you do it correctly. But if you vary from doing things properly, there's a lot of power being fed to your car. It's not like a lamp or ceiling fan, pulling, half a kilowatt. There's a lot of power that goes through these things. And that's when you have problems.
I think that's spot on. And I think one thing to add to that, and this is like, even though we've both been kind of following in this industry for like close, I mean, you've probably been now longer than that, but like pretty much about a decade. This is still kind of the early days. One of the things I've been working on lately is actually converting we have our daily driver is a Tesla Model Y long range EV. But we also have a 1987 Land Rover Defender 90 that we're working on converting to electric. It's got a 3.9 liter V8. It's an awesome vehicle. We live in Central Oregon, so there's mountains and everything. It's great for hikes and so on. But it is wild to me. This is not as true with charging, because you do have some of the kind of the US electrical code and standards, but with actual EV conversions, I went to a course just for fun this past year down in Phoenix. It was a great course, and we're actually going to have a couple of the people from that speak later in a month or so. But it's still the Wild West. There's like no specifics as where a lot of these retrofits, or like how exactly the wiring has to be done. And I think you add that to what you're talking about with a lot of these kind of lower quality chargers being put on the market, and you kind of do have like the perfect storm of these probably not well documented, not everything for sure is going to be UL listed, but all these things just kind of get on the market. Electricians, good or bad, maybe this is the first one they install. So there's like so many different variables and points at where this can go wrong, that the more you can do to save, you're essentially spending a little bit more money to save yourself a lot of money down the road, and headache, really, to make sure you have a
safety.
Exactly.
When do you usually charge your car?
ABC. I'm always be charging, but I know what you mean. At night,
overnight.
Generally. Yeah.
Overnight. Okay.
Yeah.
When's the last time that you want to have some kind of problem? When you're sleeping. So it's like, you're up, in your bedroom sleeping, and down in your garage, you have this device that's pulling, 48 amps, the 11 kilowatts of power. The rest of your house is only consuming 3 or 4 kilowatts of power at the time, just to power your refrigerator and some things, so your EV is pulling 3 times the power, 3 to 4 times the power of the rest of your house. And, you've got shady equipment, without, or had somebody install it that didn't understand that they had to torque all the connections to a specific torque rating that's listed in the owner's manual. So they just grabbed their wrench and went, okay, that's good. The next, that's good, no, it's not good, because those connections are going to get up to 150, 160 degrees while the car's charging. And then if you live in a cold weather area like Oregon, after the car's done charging, they're going to drop down to maybe 20 or 30 degrees. Then you're going to plug it in, and they're going to go up to 140 degrees. That enormous power variation causes the screws to actually back out. And
Yeah.
now you get arcing, and you have to have a qualified person work on this. And it's one of the reasons why I partnered with this outfit called Qmerit. I don't know if you heard of them, but they specialize in EV charging installations. And all their installers, not to give them a plug, but that's the reason, is they're trained on EV charging installations and equipment, and they know to follow all best practices for EV charging. And yeah, I'm not saying use Qmerit, just use somebody who understands EV charging equipment, and that they're not just going to go, it's tight enough, which you get, even licensed electricians do that. Before I have an electrician install my charging equipment, I'd ask them, do you do this frequently? Do you use a torque wrench when you tighten the connections? I'd ping them on that. And then here's another one. You're not going to use aluminum wire, right? Because aluminum wire is cheaper, but aluminum wire is not, none of the charging equipment suppliers certify aluminum wire to be used on their product. So you got to pull copper, because it expands and contracts too much, aluminum wire.
It's funny you should say. I'm like, is that, I almost would have sworn, because it stood out to me, but I'm probably wrong, that the Tesla charger it said you could use aluminum wire, but
no.
Yeah.
Specifically says in the owner's manual, do not use aluminum
I didn't,
wires.
Needless to say, I didn't.
Yeah.
But I almost
wanted,
for some reason, I was like, remembering, like when I read it, it stood out, but I must be thinking of something else. But
it says copper only.
Which makes sense. I'm totally with you. But I think one final thing to cover on that. Do you still have the 1450 plug that you were showing me before we start recording here? I think that's also a great example. And I guess for anyone listening, Tom, do you want to give a little overview?
So I have a bunch of these, actually. Do you see, this is a NEMA 1450 outlet. And as you can see, it's not in great shape. This one here is made by Leviton, and you can buy it for about $10. Now, there's other NEMA 1450 outlets that look exactly the same as this that costs $100. One, for instance, is made by a brand called Hubble. And so how come you've got these two outlets that look identical for the most part? The Hubble's thicker, but the front of it would look the same, and it's supposed to be able to work just as fine. Why does one cost $10 and the other one costs $100? There's got to be a difference there, right? Or is Hubble just a greedy company that's trying to, get more money out of you? And it's the former, not the latter. There's some very low quality outlets out there, and it's one of the reasons why I just recommend everybody hardwire their charging equipment. But I understand some people prefer buying a plug-in unit, but if you do, buy a high quality industrial grade outlet. Now, Leviton advertises this as industrial grade. Anybody can say it's industrial grade. So that's a problem, because you can't just read the.
For anyone listening, he just put up a 1450 outlet that now has a hole burnt through it that you could probably put a ping pong ball through. It's very concerning. Needless to say, but that is 100% spot on. I think you bring up a great point there, Tom. It's like, usually when people ask me, I realize it's usually more money, but if they can do it, just go for the EF. I always call them chargers too, but yes, technically the EVSE. But I get it. Sometimes situation dictates that you just have a 1450 in your garage. Great. Replace it. Don't use
replace it. And it costs less to hardwire a charger, because then you don't have the $100 expense of the outlet, and it's just it's a safer installation. And so when people basically say, well, why does this happen with the cheap ones? These are certified for use. But the problem is they're not up for the duty cycle of electric vehicle charging. These will work just fine if you plug something into it every couple of weeks and you use that device, whatever it is, for an hour. But with EV charging, you're pulling the maximum current that this is rated to power, sometimes for 6, 7, 8 hours continuously, 3, 4, 5 times a week. So it just cannot sustain that. I'm telling, if you buy a Leviton outlet like this, a 1450, it's going to melt. It's just a matter of when. And it depends on how much you use it, how many hours continuously, how much power you're pulling through it. If you're pulling the maximum 40 amps through one of these, and you have a battery with a big EV and you drive a lot, that guy's going to melt within the first year. And I have dozens and dozens of my followers that have sent me pictures. Some almost burned down their house over it. It's just not worth it. Buy good quality equipment.
Yeah, and I think just one final thing to say on it, just to think about it, is like, as you said, you're doing your charging at night, you're drawing way more power from the EV. And for any naysayers that are listening, this is totally safe. It just has to be done right.
Mhm.
There's a reason that house fires have started from all sorts of things in the past, whether it be dryer lint to uh, other sorts of shorts. You just have to make sure it's done right. And once it's done right, it's a pretty much set it and forget it. But
Mhm.
another way to look at it is essentially at night, you're running 2 to 3 commercial welders while your car is charging. I mean, it's a lot of power.
Yeah.
So
All
you want
night.
to, yeah, exactly. For an extended period. And I think that really is the big thing, as
Mhm.
opposed to other intermittent things that a lot of these
Yes.
240s are designed for.
Because the
Now that,
power is from the heat generated. And the
exactly.
longer you run it, the hotter it gets. If you just run for a short period, let it cool down, plug it in again, you're not going to generate that heat. But the problem is the 4, 5, 6, 7 hours of continuous load, that thing just gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and the connections can't handle it.
And now that we've scared everyone listening, what what are some of the chargers that you right now are kind of most impressed with, and really, or the EVSEs that you've really found to be the most durable and just kind of best case for a lot of people who are in the market looking for one?
Yeah. So, there's so many. And I always tell people there's really no one size fits all. You need to, there's some questions that need to be answered for me to tell you what the best charger is. And actually, I have a website that I didn't even mention it to you, Chase, a new website that I'm just launching. It's called evchargingstations.com. And on that, I'm building, it's not available yet. And I haven't really talked about this website because it's not ready to show everybody, but I'm building a tool on that it's going to ask you 10 questions. And based on that, I'm going to give you my top 3 recommendations on chargers to buy. So because
Cool.
so many people send me emails saying, Tom, I just bought a BMW i4, and I live in this area, and please tell me what charger to buy. And I can't respond to the emails because I get overwhelmed with them. Sometimes I get 20, 30 emails every day from
Yeah, and
followers asking me.
that's a good layup for another plug for you, no pun intended, about the batteries included podcast I've been listening to with you, Kyle Connor, and Martin, along
Dominic and
with,
Martin.
yeah, there you go. Great thing for anyone listening to this. You really should listen to that. I've really enjoyed it. All of them are very entertaining and great on kind of EV news, but this is the exact thing I remember hearing in one of the last episodes. You were talking about how you're getting so many emails about this, and I can understand. I've been to schedule this call, but there's nothing against that. It's going to be busy than bored. So I think
And
that's
people think
great to
I'm
hear.
avoiding them,
Exactly,
because I
exactly.
don't
And I've
respond,
had
but
the
it's
same
not it.
issue. I get it.
I just get so many emails that I can't
Right.
keep up with it. And I feel bad because I always used to respond to people that reached out to me. I feel like if people took the time to ask me a question, I should honor them with a response, but I can't anymore. So I'm like, how do I deal with this? How do I help people? So I said, I'm going to make this tool, and I'm just going to direct people to the charger recommendation tool. And
Which I think
that's
is
what we're going to
great.
do. Yeah, but you asked me, I haven't answered the question yet about which chargers. So some of my top chargers today, the new Tesla Universal Wall Connector, which is so cool, and I'll show you really quick. And the cool thing about this was Tesla only sent it to me. I am the
Right.
only person that Tesla sent this to, which was an honor. So it's a regular Tesla connector, the NAX connector, but it also charges CCS, or not CCS, J1772 equipped vehicles. You press a little button here, and a J1772 adapter attaches to the top of the Tesla adapter. And now it's tethered. You can't get it off, so you can't steal it. But this new universal charger can charge any EV sold in North America, which is really good. So that's one of my top recommendations. I also recommend the Emporia charger, which is a really good charger. The Grizzle E, which is a low cost 40 amp, very robust charger. Even the ChargePoint Home Flex behind me here is a very good unit. It's pricey, but it's a very good unit. Those are some of my top recommendations. But again, I need to have a lot of questions. Are you going to mount it outside? Do you live in a cold weather area? Do you live in a really hot weather area? How many amps do you have available in your house? So there's a lot of questions. There's no one size fits all.
And I think that also speaks really well to your channel and some of the stuff you do, because I was like, okay, he's doing EV charge reviews. I guess that makes sense. There's a need for that. How do you really charge an EV? And then you're plunging in water. You're doing all these things. Like, Okay, no, that totally makes sense and is definitely legit.
Yeah.
That like these are the things that these are exposed to
Yeah.
and need to be designed for. So
Yeah.
yeah, I understand why you're getting so many emails about it. I'm glad you're making this website for people to go to. And
Yeah.
for anyone that has questions, I highly recommend it. One thing before we change topics, I am really curious on how you've been liking the Ford home charging V2G, V2L charger, how that's been going. Because I've watched a couple of the episodes about the installation, and I wouldn't say issues, but just difficulties with setting up a system like that. So I'm just curious if there, for one, your overview thoughts on the process, and then two,
Mhm.
if you've been using a lot and how what you think of it.
Okay, so yeah, what you're talking about is I have the Ford Charge Station Pro, which is an 80 amp level
Right.
2 charger, but this is a bidirectional charger. It can accept power as well as deliver to the vehicle. And then if you have your Ford Lightning and you have this charger, and then you buy what they call the home integration kit, then you can actually use your truck to power your house, which I have. I had it installed. I have a very comprehensive video on the installation and how it works with the different power flow and everything. So the one thing that I can say is, has it been seamless? No, there's been issues. But I expected that because this is the first generation. This is the
For
first
sure.
time your EV could power your house. So I knew going into this, and I was one of the first people to get this and have it installed. I knew there was going to be issues. I feel bad for some of the retail customers that did it thinking like, yeah, this was just going to rock
Well, and I
right from
think
day
this goes
one.
back
And
exactly to what I was saying. Like this, like talking
Mhm,
about Wild West, the whole
mhm,
V to G, that whole space is still,
yeah.
I think,
And
has
it's
a lot
going
of
to be
promise,
for a
but it's
while.
early days.
It's going to
Yeah,
be rocky for a
yeah,
while for all the products out there. And so yeah, I had some issues with it, but I've gotten it to work. I had something needed to be repaired, got fixed. But it works. When I plug my truck in, if I have a power outage, it's powering that I can deliver about 10 kilowatts, 9.6 kilowatts to the house, and it works. It's just there's some glitches still. There's still some software glitches, but pretty much every time I needed to use it, it worked.
that's great
But I
though.
have had to fix it. It had a problem. So,
Yeah. And then, I mean, once again, I think it's a really cool technology and there's definitely some use cases for it, but
mhm,
it's not a plug and play solution. And that's not
not yet.
essentially Ford's problem either. I just don't think a lot of people realize the complexity of doing a system like that. Essentially, the way, and you can probably even do a better job describing this than I can, but because of how the most home outlets or home panels are designed for flow of energy, unless you already have like a solar system set up, there's a lot of things that kind of have to go in to make sure that the panel's used to getting energy back through it in that direction. But I think it is a technology long term that has a lot of really cool uses.
Yeah,
Um,
there's some hurdles, but I mean, in theory, the way Ford has it set up, it circumvents any issue like that what you brought up, because you do a little sub panel, and that's the panel that has all the circuits on that you're going to power, and it works fine. It's just there's still the biggest problem right now, in my opinion, is still the software needs to get ironed out, which I totally expected to happen. There's still
okay.
some software glitches, but the hardware's all works. The transfer switch, you get isolated from the grid. Boom, in a minute or so, the truck's powering the house. But it's Gen 1. It's the first
Yeah.
one of these things out there. I'm surprised it's worked as well as it has, to be honest with you.
And I'm not trying to shoot it down by any means, because I know you already, and I'm just speaking from my personal experience. My house was built in the 70s, and it is only a 100 amp panel, so I would
Mm.
have to have a few other things done to it to really get it to
You'd have
that
to have
point.
a service upgrade.
Exactly, and I guess that's what I'm talking to is a lot of people don't fully appreciate and understand that and how common that is. But I'm going to do that anyway when I probably put solar in our house. It's just one of those things that just to be aware of. It's not an impossibility, but it's not,
Yeah.
unless you have a newer home, it's probably not going to be as straightforward as
No,
it could be.
no, it's going to be expensive too.
Yeah.
It's going to
Yeah.
be very expensive. So, and what makes it even harder to say you should do it was the Lightning, for instance, that you need to be able to power the system, also has Pro Power on board, which can deliver the same 9.6 kilowatts. It's just you have to run a whole bunch of extension cords from the
Right. Right.
truck
Right.
to power your stuff. And then you can't power things like your lights because they're all hardwired through your house.
Right.
but you could run your refrigerator and things that are important from the truck. So you already have the power. So you say, well, I can kind of get through a power outage doing it
You can
this
kind of
way and
hack it a little
set up
bit.
some portable, right, for
Yeah.
free. Or I could
Right.
spend $12,000 and have this system and worry about the software working, so
Exactly.
it's it's a tough financial decision at this point.
Yeah. I think all the stuff we've talked about has been great, but it has also been in the realm of level 2 charging. It has all been about usually people who own their own home or have a rental where it's kind of easy access. I'd love to kind of hear a little more about your thoughts on where you see the future of level 2 and even level 1 charging for maybe people who are in kind of multifamily homes, or even any I've seen some out there, but I'd be curious to see your thoughts on like ones just for like street parking solutions like that. If there are any you've seen, or what you think maybe some of the solutions for that space might be.
Sure. Well, I was in Amsterdam recently, and it's just the cool thing was they were all over the place. They had like parking meters. They had electric
Yeah.
car chargers all over the place. And in a lot of places in Europe, they have that. We don't really have a lot of street charging here in the US. I know there were a few small pilot programs years ago, I remember, but we really don't have that yet. We need it here for sure, especially in the cities. But you know, we also need charger ready legislation. And with that is, for like it mandates that new construction be built with the added capacity in the electrical panels and the conduit installed to install electric vehicle charging equipment when needed. They don't mandate that you put the chargers in immediately, because some of the buildings are going to say, look, nobody lives here, nobody has an electric car. They're going to, in the coming
Right.
years. So having the infrastructure in place so that when you need to hang a charger, it's just hang it on the wall, pull the cable, energize it, and there you go. You have your charger. Some of the biggest problems we have, let's say in some of the cities, like I live near New York City, is the buildings are so old. It would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to trench, to bring new cable to the building, to do service upgrades on the building, to do the interconnection. So at least if we start doing all new construction, and even single family homes, should be mandated that there's a 50 amp circuit, dead end into the garage, inside a junction box, closed off. You don't have to make them install the charging equipment, but at least have a circuit with it ready to go. So somebody buys the house, they have an electric car. Okay, good. You just need to hang the charger, connect the wires, you're good to go. So that, I think that's the direction we need to start going in. We need to have more charger ready legislation. Now, way back in, I think 2014, I testified in New York City in front of the Housing and Transportation Board because Mayor Bloomberg at the time wanted to have a charger ready legislation, and we got it passed. So New York City, for instance, already has charger ready legislation in place, but we need to have it in all the cities. Everywhere should have charger ready legislation. New parking lots and new multifamily buildings that are installed should have the conduit installed and the added capacity waiting in the electrical panel, so they don't have to do service upgrades and retrench and everything when the time comes that half the building is occupied by people with EVs and they want to charge their cars at home.
And yeah, and I think that's pretty spot on. I've actually just through my previous exposure, kind of working commercial solar, it's a similar thing where like it's not, would it be adding a cost? Yes, but the cost is so insignificant to help make the house solar and EV ready that it also adds just a huge, in my opinion, selling or even renting opportunity for whoever down the road, that all then they have to do is kind of do some wiring. And it sounds simple, and it really is, but if you have to do it retroactively, it increases the cost and does it removes that simplification pretty quickly. So
it's exponential. You know what it costs
it
to
doesn't seem like it is, but it definitely is.
It's incredibly it's much more expensive, but you still have builders pushing back on these regulations, because to them, even let's say they built a building that cost $400,000 to build, they don't want to spend the extra $2,000
and honestly, I don't think it's that much,
you know,
especially if you're doing like a large development. It's like in my
Yeah.
experience, like closer to 150. It's like pretty
Well, I mean, let's say you're
insignificant
trenching. Let's say
scale.
you're trenching to a
Well, fair.
parking area, and you got to
Okay,
put in
fair.
conduit under the ground. But while you're there doing all this site work,
Yeah.
it's not that expensive. When you have to saw cut the pavement, dig it up,
Right.
my God, it costs so much more. So yeah, but we should have this. We should have more charger ready legislation. All new construction should be mandated to have the infrastructure ready to go when the people want to add charging equipment.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'm a big proponent of, and obviously kind of is unsaid with your show, is how important level 2 charging is. Where as much as I love DC fast charging and watching you and Kyle Connor and some of these other people do the DC fast charging and all these tests and stuff, at the end of the day, there's so like once you kind of know the system and you know where what it reminds me of is kind of what was the big thing in aviation, at least before COVID, was instead of it was kind of the hub and spoke model. Instead of like flying from LA to Frankfurt and then Frankfurt to a small airport, you would fly from Santa Barbara, or I guess not Santa Barbara in this case, but the idea is you'd fly directly instead of having to go through this other infrastructure. And I think that's totally true with level 2. It's like once you know where you're going has level 2 charging, or you make sure that it's at least even level 1 charging where you're going. Like so many of the trips I take now, I don't ever have to even use a supercharger, which unto itself is a luxury to have the access to the supercharger, as I'm constantly reminded by some of my friends and others. But it requires a little more planning, but it saves a lot of money. It makes the trip so much easier. And not that supercharging by any means is stressful or tough. It's just like you get there and you never even have to think about dealing with it. And I think while there's a lot, and I think it goes exactly to the legislation part of this, so much of the money and focus goes to like the sexiness, if you will, of DC fast charging or how necessary that is. And it obviously does have a large part to play, but I think it highlights not enough people making this legislation are exposed to, let alone driving EVs. And that's where the importance of like level 2 charging or just trying to make it that more common and easier for people will inherently minimize the need, not only just the need for DC fast charging, but like how many people will be using one at a time. Obviously, there will be like holidays and certain things like that. But if you can proactively make it easier for people to use level 2 charging, they skip it completely. And I think a lot of people coming from the gasoline world and combustion engine world don't fully appreciate kind of how magical that is. Everyone kind of thinks about like, oh, how expensive DC fast chargers are, or how much it costs to charge, or how long it takes, where it's like, I rarely have to do that anymore. And I'll go a couple hundred miles at least from different parts of the state or to other states and never even have to use a fast charger. And that might be a little bit, that's maybe, I guess, me ranting a little bit more of a pro EV driver move, but it's something that I think needs to be more of the conversation.
Well, we do need all levels of charging.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's use cases for all of them. And yes, we need to level 2 charging to proliferate and be everywhere, like hotels, for instance. Every single hotel should have a bank of level 2 chargers. Let's face it. Level 1 charging even works. Long-term parking places, long-term parking lots, airports. Airports should have rows and rows of inexpensive level 1 charging.
And just to
clarify,
clarify,
or at least
for anyone
outlets.
listening, that's just a regular wall outlet.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're parked there for days, like you're on a trip at an airport, why not be trickle charging on 120 volts, right? It's so much less expensive to install. So, shopping centers, shopping malls, level 2 charging is great for that. So the coffee shops, I mean, we need all levels and all speeds of charging. True. Really. And you're right. That will, if there was more level 2 charging, that would take some of the stress off the need to have so many DC fast chargers. But we still need a lot of DC fast chargers to enable long distance traveling.
Yeah.
And also for people that can't charge at home. If they live in an area that they don't have that ability to charge overnight, they need access to fast level DC fast charging. So they, in a pinch, they could just add 30-40% of their battery to get them through the next couple of days.
For sure. And I think that does just kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier, though, to reiterate, like on-street parking charging needs to be figured out. Like just the more you can minimize going people to DC fast charger for a lot of reasons. But as someone who, I mean, I guess I can kind of gloat, but compared to you, I'm sure it's nothing. I mean, I put on 34,000 miles doing road trips on my car last year. And yeah, a good portion of that would have not been possible without DC fast charging.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, there were plenty of times I was like, I'm fast charging, but if had there been a level 2 along the way where we got lunch or where we're going to, I wouldn't have had to charge at all. But um, more charging is better than what we're at right now. So I'm for all types of charging. I think you put it very eloquently and pretty accurately that we need everything.
And we'll get
Um,
it. It's coming.
for sure, for sure. With that, I know your focus kind of has been more around level 2 chargers, but with some of the EVs you've been driving, and I guess refresh my memory, you had a Rivian, but right now, what are the EVs that you have personally? You got the F-150 Lightning.
I currently own an F-150 Lightning, a Rivian R1S. I
Oh,
had a
gotcha.
Rivian
It's the SUV.
R1T.
Gotcha.
I had the R1T and I sold it when my Rivian R1S came in and bought the R1S. So I have a Lightning, a Rivian R1S, and a Chevy Bolt EV.
Gotcha. And of those three, what would you say is your favorite daily, and it kind of makes charging the easiest since they are all CCS?
Yeah, probably the Lightning is my
Yeah.
favorite daily driver. Yeah. I love how it drives. And that's what I hop in when all three vehicles are parked in the driveway. If Meredith, my wife's name is Meredith, if she hasn't taken one of them, my first vehicle to jump in is always a Lightning.
And just out of
The other
curiosity,
vehicles are great vehicles. I
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
like how the Lightning drives.
Yeah. And I know you've tested like the Lyric and a couple other cars recently. What having such a wide exposure to auto OEMs and how they're approaching level 2 and DC faster, like what has been your takeaway of where these auto OEMs? I know you'd shared on some of the GM products. I forget, what is it? They don't have. It doesn't show the kilowatt.
No, well, I hate the fact that all the GM cars don't show the state of charge once you get under like
That's
8% state of charge at the
That's
very
right.
end
That's
when you
right.
need it the most, when
Yeah.
you're going to be white knuckled and worried about running away. The whole time it shows you the state of charge and how many remaining miles you have. And then you get down to the end and it just says low. Like
Yeah.
it gives you nothing. Now you can get that information in your app. And on the newer GM vehicles, if you are using the integrated navigation system, you can see like your remaining state of charge. But like, so the vehicle knows what the state. They
Right.
selectively choose to make it go away from the driver's display. I'm driving. I don't want to pull up my phone and check my app or
For
whatever.
sure.
So yeah, it's a puzzling decision that they do, and I don't understand it. It's bizarre. They're the only company that does this, that just doesn't, like, once the vehicle gets low, they decide, oh yeah, you don't need to know what your state of charge is anymore or how many remaining miles you have. We're just going to tell you it's low. Like, what the hell?
You already knew that, but we're just going to
Yeah.
remind you. Yeah.
Yeah, like, if you didn't have white knuckles before it blinked to low, you're gonna be like, like,
Yeah. I mean, I
how
feel
am I
like you're
gonna
going to
make it
break
to the
something.
charger?
I mean, yeah,
It's
it really
puzzling.
doesn't give you confidence in the system. If you like, even the car, it seems like doesn't
Yeah.
know what it's at.
Yeah.
With that wide exposure and that experience, what, I guess, are there any cars that stand out to you right now, besides, as you said, the GM ones, that are doing kind of a good job at like just making the transition, if it's your first EV, are doing a good job of that? And then second, any kind of feedback or thoughts you have for general automakers and their EV programs?
Yeah. So, I don't know if there's a specific vehicle that I would say this vehicle, but what I will say is some manufacturers, the starters particular, like Tesla and Rivian, I think do a good job at helping the customer understand EVs. Like Rivian, for instance, when you're DC fast charging, and your charge rate gets derated because the charging station isn't delivering the power it can, because maybe it's overheating or the truck's battery is too hot, so it's limiting the power. It gives you a little warning that says DC fast charging rate lowered, due to temperature. So I love that. And I love when they also display how many kilowatts the vehicle is taking at that time, which is, I think it's very helpful. I love when some EVs give you battery temperature. The Rivians just had are going to be having a big software update that's going to be included in. Um, Porsche always did that. The Taycans always gave
That's
you
true.
battery temperature. And that's useful information to EV owners. And I think some of the existing legacy brands, they don't understand that that's very important for people to view, and they don't give it to you. So I think that's something that some of the manufacturers are doing well. My Lightning, what I think is really good, what Ford does is they give you this regenerative braking coach, and it tells you
Oh,
the
right, right, right.
percentage every time you take the car down to a stop. It tells you what's the percentage of stopping that was done with regen versus friction brakes. So it can coach you to help you maximize your range, because every time you stop, you want that to say 100%. That way you're reclaiming as much energy as you can. And I love it when the manufacturers do that.
No, those are
Things
great
like that.
examples. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the temperature one is an interesting one to mention. I think definitely for, I don't want, I guess maybe EV nerds or pro EV drivers, it matters a lot. Do you think that maybe the reason automakers are doing that is it might be concerning or kind of too much information to like someone who's coming from a combustion engine driver? They're like, okay, I got to worry about the temperature of my battery now.
Well, there's always been temperature gauges on ICE
Right,
vehicles, right?
right, right, right.
Why remove it for the EV,
Yeah.
But I
Oh,
understand what you're saying. Yes, I
yeah,
think there are times, but you know what? If that's the case, don't put it front and center. Put it in the
right.
info in somewhere in the settings where people that really want it can pull it
Have
up
the
and they
option
can activate it. Give us the
for
option,
sure.
because the
Yeah.
vehicle knows that information. Give us the option to access it if we want to.
No, I completely agree with for sure. And then I realize we're kind of coming up on the end of time here. With I guess I'd be curious to hear a couple things, and one is with the current state of DC fast charging, what are you kind of hoping to see, or what do you think is the answer to kind of solve the current situation with what we're seeing with the public DC fast chargers kind of struggling and having issues with trying to get CCS vehicles to be a viable road tripping option?
Yeah, well, I mean, one way, in my opinion, to improve reliability is everybody wants part of this NEVI funding. Everyone wants subsidies, right, for DC fast charging equipment. And I'm not necessarily against giving subsidies, because we need to get this out as quickly as possible.
Right.
But there has to be strong, incentives baked into that. Not incentives, it's strong, like punishment penalties if the equipment doesn't operate properly. And the way it's currently written, it really isn't. Like, they talk about uptime, but there's different ways you can define uptime.
Yeah.
If the company just pings the station and the station says, "Hey, I'm fine," that's considered being up. But then you go to plug in your EV and it doesn't work. Like, it's not interfacing, it's not working, or it's
Right.
delivering like 15 kilowatts and you're expecting 150 kilowatts. That's still uptime. And we need to do a better job at making sure, if companies take public funding for this infrastructure, it has to work as advertised, and it has to have an extremely high uptime, better than 95% uptime
Yeah.
otherwise, the company has to repay the federal funds that they got, or pay a big fine. It's that's a big thing, because there's too much equipment out there that hasn't been serviced properly, isn't working properly, and people rely on this. And you buy this brand new EV, you're new to EVs, you've had gas cars your whole life, and now the first road trip you take, it's a disaster. You can't charge because it's broken, or for whatever reason they're offline. You're going to want to give the car back and say, "The hell with these EVs. They're not ready yet," and
Right.
it's unfortunate. And that's the case we have for the most part, outside of the Tesla supercharger network. It's very spotty at best on reliability, and it's a big problem. We have to do better.
For sure. And I think everything you said is pretty spot on. It's one of the interesting takeaways I had with speaking of the NEVI funding, recent conversations we had with Lauren McDonald of EV Adoption. He was talking about how like NEVI funding long term will be a benefit, but it's having a pretty strong short term negative impact because of how slow the funds are being rolled out. In his opinion, it's also slowing down any of non-Tesla chargers from actually putting more chargers into the ground because they're waiting on the money. They're waiting on these things because of the delta in cost. And it's
Yep.
only kind of giving Tesla more of an advantage where they are making money. They can just keep rolling them out. And in the short term, at least, it's really not helping the situation with expanding DC fast chargers. And
That,
I
that
think, I'm sorry,
no, I
go
was
for
going
it.
to say that could be true. That could be the case. But you know what? Tesla isn't Tesla spending their own money for the
Right.
most part. They're going to get a chunk of the NEVI funding too. But what they're spending now without that is their own money, and
Right.
nobody's stopping other companies from spending their own money. It's they don't want to when you've got this giant pool of public funds coming your way. So I don't feel bad for the companies that are waiting and they feel like they're being left behind. Well, pour some of your own money into it and get this thing rolling, and then when the NEVI funding comes through, use that money also.
Yeah. I think it was really interesting just hearing from him because like I didn't want to be a conspiracy theorist about it, but that kind of been my feeling of it. And he'd even mentioned just in his conversations with these companies that they're like, they've kind of slowed down the rollout because now that there's an allotted amount of money and there's clear path to it, they're more focused on that than kind of even maintaining, but especially adding new stations, which I think, like I said, long term, I think it'll be more DC faster. But in the interim, for non-Tesla drivers, it's kind of only making the Tesla supercharger network and that structure more powerful.
Well, listen, in the first quarter of 2024, there's going to be adapters ready to access that for the manufacturers that have already agreed to integrate the NACS connector. So we're only a few months away from
for sure
me being able to roll up in my Lightning to a supercharger and use my adapter and charge away. So the other networks are going to feel even more left behind once that happens.
How soon are you going to roll up to the supercharger in your Bolt?
Oh, as soon as well,
get the max 60 kilowatts.
As soon as I can, not even, it barely pulls that much. I'll probably pull in one day at like 0 and charge to 100% just to record Tesla owners like being angry at me, like give me 2 hours. What the hell is going on?
Yeah.
No, I won't do that. I would.
I know. I'm just
if somebody needed to.
Okay. Final question. This is kind of something we ask all of our guests. In your opinion, with your exposure, what are some of the innovative ways that industry or government or both can help accelerate the rollout of EVs and battery technology, in your opinion?
The battery technology is an interesting thing. I think we need to incentivize more like homegrown battery development here in this country. We really do. It's going to be an enormous factor over the next few decades with regards to controlling the industry. We can't rely on foreign countries to provide us with our battery tech. So I would be all in for the government and, giving away our money again here. If they were to have some kind of big program like to subsidize the development of new factories in this country, developing new battery tech here. It's going to be the wave of the future. Batteries are going to be powering our vehicles for a long time. I'm not going to say it's the last technology and the grid. So, we right now, most of our batteries come from China, and, our relationship with China can be shaky at times. And if it takes a turn for the worse in the future, and China decides, hey, we're not going to give the U.S. batteries anymore. Let's say we're at some kind
even in just tariffs or any sort of thing.
Exactly. So I really think we need to invest heavily in this country in battery technology. And I would love to see the government have some sort of a new deal where they put a ton of money aside for companies to invest in battery development and manufacturing plants here domestically. I think that would be the right thing to do.
I couldn't agree more. And I think on that note, that's a great place to end this. I just want to say thanks again, Tom. It's great to have you on. Any people listening, if you're not already following State of Charge or the Batteries Include podcast or the evchargingstations.com up and coming website, or you have friends who have questions about what charger they should be putting in, please reach out to Tom on one of those channels, if not even on Twitter, or I guess now X. Always a great source to connect with him. But Tom, thank you so much for being on. Been really a pleasure and great to finally speak with you.
Thanks for having me, Chase.